Hi friends, welcome back. We are still in Unit 7, The American Revolution, The Road to Independence. Today we're going to be reading the very last chapter in the book. It's the Enrichment chapter number 2. It is called Artillery Training. And before we start, I want to go over this word artillery. And I have a special guest who's going to tell us what the word artillery means. Guest, what does the word artillery mean?
Large guns used for war on land.
Large guns, maybe weapons, used for war that's happening on land. Okay, here we go. Gentlemen, welcome to the 3rd Continental Artillery Regiment under the command of Colonel Crane. I am Sergeant Campbell. You are here to learn to fire a 6-pound field cannon like the one you see before you. Look at the bottom of your page. This cannon is not like the musket your father taught you to fire back on the farm. It fires a 6-pound cannonball and has a maximum range of 2,000 yards. That means it can go 2,000 yards, or a little more than a mile. But if you want to fire with accuracy, you will want to select a target that is no more than 1,000 yards away. This cannon has wheels on it, so it can be wheeled around on the battlefield. That is why we call it a field cannon, explained the sergeant. To fire this weapon, you will need to work together in teams of 7. Each of you will have a job, and I will explain what you must do. Are you ready to master the weapon?
Yes, sir.
The men replied. I can't hear you.
Yes, sir.
The men shouted as loudly as they could. That's more like it, continued Sergeant Campbell. Now, gentlemen, what you see before you is a muzzle-loading cannon. That means that the cannonball is inserted at the muzzle end of the cannon, rather than at the breech end. This is the muzzle end, and this is the breech end, said the sergeant, pointing first at the front and then at the back of the cannon. At this point, you might think it would be perfectly fine to talk about the front of the cannon and the back of the cannon, but you would be mistaken. A skilled artilleryman does not speak of the front of the cannon or the back of the cannon. He speaks of the muzzle or the breech. So, what is this end of the cannon called? Sergeant Campbell quizzed the men as he pointed to the front of the cannon.
The muzzle,
said the men in unison. That is correct, proclaimed Sergeant Campbell. And this end? He bellowed, pointing at the other end.
The breech,
yelled the men. Good. Now, is this cannon a muzzle loader or a breech loader?
A muzzle loader, sir.
Welcome, yelled the men again. Correct. This is a muzzle loader, which means the cannonball is inserted at the muzzle end of the weapon, continued Sergeant Campbell. However, there is something else that needs to be inserted into the cannon first, before the cannonball. Do any of you know what that is? Asked the sergeant. Several hands went up. Yes, asked the sergeant.
The powder?
Said one of the soldiers. Correct, Sergeant Campbell retorted. Gentlemen, there is no point in putting a cannonball in unless you have already put in the charge of gunpowder. The powder is going to explode behind the cannonball, and the force of the explosion is going to send the ball flying out of the cannon. But the powder has to be behind the cannonball, so it has to go in first. But before we add the powder, we must clean the cannon. And to do that, we need this item here. Do any of you know what this is called? He asked. No one spoke. This is called the sponge, added Sergeant Campbell. Repeat after me. The sponge.
The sponge,
the soldiers repeated. The sponge is the woolly part on top here. It was donated by a very patriotic sheep. General Washington and I thank her for her devotion to the colonial cause. The sponge is attached to this pole. The pole is about 10 feet long to allow you to reach down inside the cannon and clean the parts you could not otherwise reach. It is very important to clean the cannon out. Otherwise, there will be sparks in the pipe. Bits of paper or gunpowder might still be burning from the last time you fired the gun. And believe me, gentlemen, you do not want to stuff a new charge of gunpowder into the cannon if there's still fire in the pipe. That will put a speedy end to your war service. Do I make myself clear? So, always, always, always dip the sponge in a pail of water and then clean out the cannon. The soldiers nodded their heads enthusiastically. I wish you could see my special guest nodding her head. Next, we use this thing here, the mop, to dry out the inside of the cannon. Sergeant Campbell continued. If it is too wet inside the cannon, the gunpowder will not detonate. You don't want fire in the pipe, but you don't want it soaking wet either. After sponging and mopping, you are ready to insert the main charge of powder. You may be using a charge that has been measured and packed for you, or you may have to pack the correct amount of loose powder yourself. Today we will be using a pre-packaged charge. This tool, a ramrod, to drive the charge all the way down to the back of the cannon. See? Yep, she's shaking her head. Only then are you ready to insert the cannonball. Again, use the ramrod to make sure it is pressed all the way down. Ram it down like this. Once the cannon is loaded, it must be aimed. This is a very complicated business, which I will begin to explain tomorrow. For now, let's just say the higher you point the cannon, the farther the ball will travel, at least until you get it tilted at a 45-degree angle. However, as I said, that is a topic for tomorrow. Now, let's move from the muzzle end to the breech end. Do you see this small hole at the breech end of the gun? He prompted, with a serious expression on his face. Once again, the soldiers and my guest nodded. It is called the touch hole. Sometimes we call it the vent. This is where you will light the powder and fire the gun. First, however, you need to puncture the charge. In order to fire the cannon, you must poke a hole in the charge of powder that you stuffed into the cannon. See this little poker? Stick it into the touch hole and poke a hole in the charge so that some of the gunpowder is exposed. After poking the hole in the charge, you must pour a little more gunpowder into the touch hole. This is a delicate task, so do it slowly and make sure you don't spill any of it. Haste makes waste, and the Army does not have enough gunpowder to waste any of it. The last step is to insert a quill fuse filled with gunpowder. A quill fuse, as you can see, is just a feather from a liberty-loving goose that has been filled with powder. Once the quill has been inserted, you must call out, "Primed!" That means the gun has been loaded and is ready to fire. Then wait for your commanding officer to call out, "Give fire!" When he does, you will touch the quill with a long match. Then stand back. And gentlemen, don't stand here behind the gun, because the cannon will recoil, and if you're standing at the breech end, it may well knock you on your backside. Once you touch the match to the quill, boom! The cannonball will go sailing out at the redcoats, teaching them new respect for the Continental Army. Well, men, that concludes your first artillery lesson. I know it is a lot to learn, but with a few days of training and some practice, you will catch on. And with a little more practice, you should be able to fire up to 100 rounds a day. With that, Sergeant Campbell saluted soldiers and marched away. Dismissed. Friends, take a look at the picture. It shows you all the pieces and parts of the cannon and the accessories that we talked about today. And special guest, which two animals helped make the cannon, the field cannon, a success?
The sheep, which makes the wadded end of the sponge, and the goose, which makes the quill fuse, which is filled with gunpowder.
You're right. All right, friends. So long. Farewell.